I hope everybody can hear me. Thank you. Welcome again, and thanks for the positive response that we've received to our invitation. This is the largest webinar that we've put together, and we've got participants from all around Cape Town. Thanks for joining us. The first thing that you notice about these events is the obvious lack of human contact, like the handshakes, kisses, the warm hugs, or even the smile that you would just get across the room from a friend who you haven't seen for a while. And it's going to be tough to get by without those, but this platform is something that we can use to partially replace that contact. And webinars have advantages too. If you decide to use your camera, you still only need to dress your top half. You don't need to struggle to find parking, and you can mute your mic and shout abuse at the presenter when you disagree, but please make sure your mic is muted. So this Zoom platform is just one part of the new life that we are discovering under lockdown. And we plan to make the most of this platform in the weeks to come, possibly the months to come. Our next session, which we are planning, we hope to manage to get it ready for next week, will be on practical tips for property professionals during life under lockdown. So keep a lookout for invitations to that next webinar. They should be going out early next week. As far as Miltons is concerned, we are open for business, and we are offering the friendly, efficient service that has become our trademark. We've implemented comprehensive measures at all of our offices to stop the spread of COVID-19, and we are slowly finding our way. We look forward to charting these unknown waters with you, and we hope to be a guiding light for you on this journey. We are aware that a lot of people are disregarding the lockdown rules and regulations. And while people might feel morally entitled to do this, and I'm specifically not going to pass judgment on this, I do, however, want to warn you against it, especially when you're dealing with clients. There's obviously the immediate risk of being caught out and being punished for that. But if your unlawful actions result in someone catching the disease and dying, the charges against you could be increased to something much more serious, possibly culpable homicide or maybe even murder. So we need to be very careful here, and we need to make sure that we do not put other people in danger. You might have heard that the deeds office did not open on Monday. This was a disappointment for all of us, but it was to be expected. The deeds office also has to adapt itself to the new requirements of doing business in these COVID-19 times, and this is what is happening now. My estimation is that the deeds office will be accepting lodgements again from next week, possibly sooner, and I hope to be proven right. But enough of my ramblings. You've signed up here to listen to Andre du Toit, and I need to get out of the way to allow that to happen. But before I do, and for those of you who do not know Andre, here is a short introduction to this multifaceted man. Andre was trained as an actuary and worked at a higher level in the fields of insurance, reinsurance, and IT before abandoning the corporate world to follow his true passion as a speaker, a coach, and a trainer. He's an author, a teacher, a humanitarian, and the host of his own radio show on Smile 90.4 FM. With his firm grasp of current affairs, his good humor, and his infectious positivity, he's able to put world events into perspective and to show us the brighter side of life. So without further ado, and on behalf of Miltons, let me hand you over to the big positive guy, Andre du Toit.
Jim, thank you very much. I've just been sitting here trying to work out, because every second there's a ping, and I realize that ping is somebody trying to enter the room, which is they're not getting in. But we are full, gentlemen. We're up to 500. I suggest that if you go out, you may not come back in again. But that's always it's a great pleasure for us to be able to say something that is obviously necessary. So I'm speaking today about unlocking the lockdown and what that actually means. And one of the things that I've suddenly realized, and I've almost forgotten this myself, is but when I trained specifically on life expectancy. I worked for an insurance company, and what I did is I trained for large pandemics like today. In other words, how would we handle this, and what would the results potentially be? So it's been fun for me 15 years after I left the industry to try to bring back some of those thoughts and say to myself, how serious is this? and should we be taking it seriously or not? And I'm not somebody, as you know, I'm the big positive guy. I look on the bright side for most things in life. But I need to start off and just share a couple of statistics with you, which I think might be a little bit sobering. So Terry, if you're not helping somebody fix up their sound, I see a lot of people, the sound's been fixed. If we could just bring up that first slide and the next slide, thanks. All right, so interestingly enough, this is the slide that I brought up on Thursday. And for those of you that were there, I was saying we've got 3.1 million cases of the COVID virus and 225,000 deaths already. This is not a casual flu that a lot of people are making this out to be. This is something quite serious. And if I could just maybe make the point, I remember those two numbers, 3.1 million and 225,000. That was recorded on Thursday. As of yesterday, the figures are, on the next slide, 3.6 million, nearly 500,000 additional coronavirus cases, and the deaths have gone up almost 26,000. So just to let you know that this is not something which everybody is pretending that it's just a mild little thing and it's going to go away. Next slide. For those of you that were here on Thursday, you will realize that what I've done is I've actually taken away the graphs. A number of people wrote to me when I put up some of my graphs, they immediately got terrified. So I've changed it and just made it so it looks nice and simple now. The United States is an absolute hotbed of this disease. And I think it is directly due to the lack of leadership and the fact that there's been completely different approaches. On Saturday, I think it was Saturday, they had the highest number of deaths in one day of any single country, nearly 3,000 in one day. And on that day, about 9 states unlocked the lockdown completely and said you can do what you want. I think there have been an additional, just on about 10,000 deaths since Thursday in the United States. Can I have the next slide? This is what really worries me, because if I had to compare us to a country, you say, why would you compare yourself to the United Kingdom? Well, the United Kingdom only has 190,000 cases, and I say that respectfully. They were 6 days ahead of us, by the way, when we started the virus, only 6 days, and we went into an immediate hard lockdown. They decided to let it go a little bit longer and have the lockdown very relaxed, and as a result, now they've got 28,000 deaths. But even for the most basic mathematician, if you sit there and say 190,000 people have got the disease, 10% would be 19,000. You see something is going horribly wrong here. The incidence of death, and I think it's only the 4th highest in the world. This is not a disease. The Americas has a disease where it's running about 1.5%. When you come to places like the United Kingdom, Spain, and Italy, this is something which is devastating the population. And the question I have to ask myself as a mathematician is to say, what would this look like if it got loose in South Africa, where we have 10 million people plus with HIV and a large TB constituent and a lot of people whose immune systems are deficient. And so I suggest that we may see quite strict numbers. Next slide. So here's where we are. I like you, am getting a bit tired of sitting at home. I've been here for 10 days longer than most of you. I got sick with the flu, believe it or not. Of all the things to get sick with this year, I got a little bit of a flu. And what happens, I went into quarantine 10 days before, so I'm a little bit longer than what you've been there. And it's driving me a little bit crazy. But the reality is that you're sitting as a state president and you've got to make certain decisions. You've got to say to yourself, if we'd left it, let's say, for example, we'd left it at the same stage as the UK and we hadn't had the shutdown, my guesstimate is that our mortality rate would be around about the same. We would be looking roughly at about 30,000 people dead now. And for me, that's an absolutely horrifying figure. So all that they've done, all that this lockdown has done, there's no other reason for it, is just to prepare for when the virus is actually going to hit us. It has not yet hit us. It is about to hit us. So one of the things that I want you people to take very seriously is this is not a joke. We are mostly going to get it, and that's something that we're going to have, but we have to look out for ourselves, and we've got to look out and make sure that nobody else gets this disease, and that hopefully that our healthcare system is big enough to actually handle it. I, like you, have lost all my income in one day. The day that this was announced, every single person cancelled every single job I had into the future. So I feel it as much as you, but I feel it possibly in one way even extra, where you guys potentially are going to go back in the very near future. For someone who does eventing and public speaking, the reality is that that might not happen until October, November, or even possibly next year. And so for me, my income has been completely compromised. So I'm not saying these things from a way to frighten you. I'm trying to say to you that this is what I believe and this is what I think you actually need to do. So where do we go to in the next, what do we know for sure? These are the things we definitely know. Next slide. One of the things we can count on is that travel is going to be severely restricted. Now, I have had the good fortune or misfortune of speaking to 3 large groups of tourism people, and they've all been counting on the fact that potentially their industry is going to come back in the 4th quarter, and many of them started planning for the 4th quarter and saying the 4th quarter is going to come back. The Minister of Tourism has made it quite clear that they are not going to open up the borders, and they're definitely not just going to open travel just willy-nilly flying backwards and forwards, although there will be some travel. It is not going to be enough to sustain that industry in the next couple of months. We are going to just have to get used to the fact that for the next 6 months or so, that things are going to be completely different. And depending on how badly we get hit or how badly we misbehave, and I don't want to sound like a school teacher here, but like a lot of people have been saying, the government sounds like school teachers now. But the reality is, I think a lot of people are not realizing, when I look at the Sea Point Promenade, then I realize that either those people just literally don't care or don't understand about what is about to hit us. Next slide, please. This is another thing which we're not going to see in the near future. We are not going to see large crowds. We're not going to see any large groups. And that, for me, is probably going to be the most difficult. Dion said that earlier on. I'm a very social person. I'm a very people's-orientated person. I'm very touch-orientated. And for me, to sit in a long-term environment in my own house and have absolutely no exposure to other people and stuff, for me, is especially difficult. But I think this is one of the things that's going to happen last. Even for those industries which are going back, distancing, physical distancing is going to become a de facto regular thing. And this is not something that's going to go away in the next 6 months. Until we have a quarantine, or not a quarantine, a vaccine, and we've managed to defeat this disease, we will probably find that physical distancing is a part of our lives for the next 12 to 18 months. Now, if you're looking for good news, that's possibly not it. But the reality is that that is what's going to happen. We have history to learn from. 1918 Spanish flu pandemic, where these things weren't watched, where physical distancing wasn't understood in the beginning, where 50 million people eventually died. And South Africa, by the way, was one of the worst. We were the 5th worst country in the world. And we had a situation where 500,000 people died in this country for one reason only. We miscalculated the quarantine period, and we told people who had the disease that they could go about their normal things 3 days after they got sick. And we lost 500,000 people. It's a hugely political decision to stand from the president's point of view and say, on the one hand, I want the economy to run, but on the other hand, people are going to die. And I think it's a bit of a juggling ball that you've got to say. And the reality is, I think we're going to open up the doors and then just have to watch it and see what happens. And then what happens, potentially move backwards and forwards depending on the results. I think it's far too early to have opened the lockdown, personally, but I'm speaking purely from a medical and a statistical point of view. From an economic point of view, we're probably 2 weeks too late, because we probably needed to open those things. So as long as you can understand that there's a game being played about how many people are you going to lose in terms of lives, as opposed to how many lives are you going to lose in terms of hunger or businesses that you're actually going to lose as well. It is a very, very difficult decision. Next slide, please. Social distancing, and I actually wanted to see if I can change this word, and I see President Ramaphosa has already changed this word. The reality is that I don't think we're social distancing. I think we're physical distancing. There's a huge difference between social distancing and physical distancing. Physical distancing means is that I wear my protective gear, and as long as I stay within about 2 meters of everybody else, there's a good chance, as long as I'm washing my hands and not touching surfaces, that I can probably keep this virus away from myself. If I can do that, then it's fairly safe. I think it's the last thing we want is to say that we're socially distancing ourselves, to say that we are going apart from each other, because that's not what we do. I think all of us have suddenly realized, with the introverts celebrating, but the majority of us are saying how sad it is that we cannot go up and hug and kiss our friends and go into places where there's large groups of people. We are a species that requires lots of interaction, and physical interaction at that. So I want you to start using the word physical distancing and social networking. I don't think any of us are ever going to get to the situation when this stops, and it will stop. When it stops, I think there's going to be a lot more dinners at our homes. Cape Townians are famous for not having dinners at their homes. I think there's going to be a lot more of that happening, a lot more cocktail parties, a lot more inviting your friends over, and making sure that we don't ever realize or take very lightly this thing that we have is the ability to connect with each other socially. So, but in the meantime, social distancing, protective gear is going to keep you alive. I've had to make the very difficult decision. I don't know if you all know that I'm asthmatic, most of you know. I've been to see the doctor, and the doctor said to me is that you are not going out of your house. So that's a huge decision for me to make, both financially and mentally as well. The reality is that many of us, and you know the rules are, if you're over 60, you really need to consider whether you're going to survive this. And it's not an easy decision to make, because the doctor said to me, and these are his words, are you prepared to gamble on the fact that you're going to survive this disease? Literally. Are you going to gamble that you're going to survive this disease? And if you have a number of risk factors, if you have lung disorders, if you're hypertensive, if you're overweight, if you're over 60, if you have an immune depressed deficiency disorder, the reality is that you're probably playing with a 50-50. And that's not the kind of numbers we need to play for. So not trying to frighten you, but I definitely need to get the seriousness of this issue in front of you. Okay, next slide, please. Zoom, I love Zoom. On the day that I lost all my business, I sat there and I thought to myself, oh my word, what am I going to do? And possibly, and I did what I probably would have done in any event, is I picked up my phone and I started WhatsApping people, and I started saying, are you okay? And the first thing I did is I started looking out for other people. And I started phoning my friends one by one, and it was fascinating to see, because some of them instantaneously lost their jobs. Some of them instantaneously got pay cuts. So some of them immediately were in financial trouble. Other people were playing, and what frustrates me enormously is when I see the social media of some people where they say, I've now read my 20th book and caught up on my 15th movie, you know, and I'm doing this and I'm doing that and baking. And Lord, where do you get the time for this? I am working as hard as I can to put food on the table for my family. Now, one of the tools that you're sitting and watching today is Zoom. And this is a very funny slide, because as people realize that this is going to be one of the major tools, this is one of the great opportunities of this time, is that any tool which can allow us to speak to each other backwards and forwards is obviously going to be one of the greatest investments. And Zoom is actually on the New York Stock Exchange, and so is Zoom ZM. And no one realized that there were actually two different companies. And Zoom ZM went completely crazy, and the share price went up 10,000% in the first day of the big lockdowns in the United States, until somebody at the stock exchange realized what was going on, that there was a confusion. And this is the moment where they've actually realized that the wrong Zoom company is going up. So is it possible to lose money on shares? Oh my goodness, because you've just paid 10,000% extra for a share that is not the right company. You've completely lost it. Out of interest, for those of you that are conspiracy theorists, my sister says I always must have a conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. But the interesting thing is that a lot of people don't realize, you always, when you get into Zoom, you go to zoom.us. That's the website for Zoom. What a lot of people don't know is it is a purely Chinese company. And then all the systems are actually owned by China. And they've gone from a company which had 10 million users to 300 million users in 2 months, and is growing exponentially almost every single day. Terry and I have the bigger version, and what we do is every single day, what we have to do is we've got to push the refresh button and pull in all the changes. And so it's becoming one of the most secure systems. They throw all their resources at security. The only thing which I find interesting is that the encryption modules are actually owned by the Chinese government. So if you're really a conspiracy theorist, then that's a good one for you. Next slide, please, Terry. There's been other opportunities, and for me, this has been one of I always want to call it a sexy opportunity. In the Kruger National Park, they have had for a while 3 vehicles which drive around and take people on live safaris. I remember doing this a few months ago, but the reality of life was far too fast for me to sit for 3 hours and watch my screen. It wasn't something that I even would have considered. Today, almost 700,000, that was the last time I looked, I would suggest it's probably closer to 1 million now. 1 million people globally have actually gone onto this website and sat with a beer in one hand and watched as these 3 vehicles go out and do game drives, extremely professionally and exceptionally well-spoken guides who take them around. That's the interesting thing. If you're a YouTuber, you'll know this, that with 1 million people like that and watching of about 80 million views so far this year, is that they've probably generated somewhere between $300,000 and $600,000 in income just from adverts alone. If we turn to the next stage and say possibly when this is finished, there are opportunities that are opening up that we've never seen before. All of a sudden people are saying, I might not even be able to go to Africa, but for $5, I can go on a 3-hour safari. And more opportunities are opening up. And I think as estate agents, we need to continuously look and say, are some of these things relevant in our industry? And we can maybe chat about that a little bit later and see all the industries that are really benefiting. Next slide, please. All right. I've got to speak about how I feel about the property industry, and that really leads me to a couple of things. You guys are in a terrifically difficult situation at the moment, and I have absolutely all the sympathy for you in the world. But what I want to say to you is that I firmly believe for those of you that hang in, that get over this hump, the rewards are going to be absolutely enormous. And I want to explain to you some of the reasons why. The first thing is that in 2017, in April of 2017, 2 companies by the name of Standard & Poor's and Fitch downgraded South Africa to junk status. Their little red star is actually a fraction to the left. Fraction to the left in April of 2017, they turned around and said, we are not worthy to lend money from the general world community. Well, when you get told that you're junk status, obviously every South African jumped up, who wants to be called junk? And so we said to ourselves, what are these 3 things that happen when you are regarded as junk? The one is that you can't lend money. And that's a huge blow. So for example, at the moment, where we desperately need cash, it's a huge issue. And you also don't want to pay through your neck. One of the strangest things that happened is that 3 weeks from the time that we were downgraded, we put out a bond request for a 10-year bond, which basically means you give us this money, we'll keep it for 10 years, we'll pay you this amount of interest. And here was the interesting factor, is that we were 3 times oversubscribed. Because the reality is our financial infrastructure in this country is still one of the best in the world. It is rated by the World Economic Forum as being the 2nd most transparent. Our banking system, financial system, even the real estate system is one of the most advanced. And so what happens, it's never been a particularly difficult thing for us to get money. And the interesting thing that happens, and if you look in the graph's a little bit small there, but what happens is that over the last 2 years, the amount of interest that we've had to pay on money that we borrow has actually reduced. It's actually reduced. And now what happens is that Moody's have turned around and said at the last minute that what happens now, we've also been downgraded completely now, and now we're in absolute junk status. I find it very cynical. For those of you that listened to my presentations in 2010, 2011, you will remember that most of those rating agencies were taken to court because there's nothing like kicking a dog when it's down. In 2009 and 2008, when the markets crashed, they then walked around and downgraded companies and countries left, right, and center. And actually, yes, we hadn't done anything wrong. But what happens is that we needed to have maybe just not a chance, but just an opportunity to do it. And the last thing we wanted to have the downgrade. So yes, it has affected us. The interest rates have gone up to nearly 12 for the money that we've borrowed. But here's the interesting thing. It has immediately plunged back down again. And I'm going to make a suggestion that we are going to be hovering just over the 9% range for bonds into the future. Next slide. Does anybody want to take a hazard guess? I mean, you obviously can't speak out loud, but anybody want to hazard a guess what this is? If this was your company, it would be a bit devastating. And the reality of what we're looking at here is the oil price. The oil price has actually plummeted and has actually gone below zero. Somebody said, how can it go below zero? Well, most oil is bought on futures. So you actually pay for the oil at a future date. And then what happens when the global shutdown came, nobody wanted any fuel. And the people that had bought it into the future still had to take it. And now what's happened is they have nowhere to put it. So what they're actually doing is trying to dispose of it to anybody who can store the oil at a price even lower than zero. In other words, they're starting to pay for people to take the price over. How does that affect you as an estate agent? Well, the first way that it affects you is tonight at midnight, the fuel price goes down again, and this time by R1.74, and that's enormous. That's enormous. So despite the fact that our rand has been hurt in the last couple of weeks, the reality is the oil price is more than compensated for that. Of the inflation basket that we look at, how we rate our inflation, 15% of that is directly due to the price of oil. And it is estimated that another 30%, and things like commodities like food and clothes and other transport things, affects it for probably another 30%. So nearly 45% of the inflation basket is directly due to the oil price. So what does that mean to us? Well, I think prices are going to be relatively stable into the future. And I think what happens, it's going to affect the inflation rate. And today, we actually saw the inflation rate dipping down, 0.2% less than what it was expected, from 4.3 to 4.1. And now all of a sudden, we're sitting at an inflation rate was dropping. And for all the good estate agents out there, when you see the inflation rate is dropping, what do you immediately start thinking? You start thinking of a drop in rates. And that's what I would like to predict. I think it is only a matter of weeks before we're going to see another drop in the interest rates. Next slide. So here I am, 60 years old, and have been involved in the economy since my early 20s. And what do I see from that slide? Is that interest rates have never, ever been cheaper. They've never, ever been cheaper. So if I want to turn around and say to an estate agent or to a first-time home buyer, when do you buy? Well, obviously your buying power is so much more today than it was 6 months ago or a year or 10 years ago. You can buy a lot more. I've been worried for a while, and probably from about 2012, that first-time home buyers, even if they earn outstanding salaries, are struggling to buy, especially in Cape Town properties. If you're looking at, I might be wrong, but a percent on $1 million is about 600 Rand a month. That's an enormous difference from the days where I foolishly bought a house in 1999 and paid that lovely 23%. The reality is now it becomes an extremely more affordable. I also think that one of the things that our president has said is that we are going to be developing this country, and we're going to have to develop in a completely different way. Listen to his words. What he's saying is we have to stop this township nonsense. There comes a time where we cannot just sit and we play. We can't just keep threatening with land distribution and all these nonsense. What we have to do is we have to allow these people to come out of those townships and start developing. If you're a person who's been trapped in this lockdown for the last 35 days and you live in a township, I think everything that is within you means that you want to get out of it. And what does that mean to us, those real estate agents? I think it is going to open up an enormous amount of opportunities for us to sell more properties. Yes, I do believe there are going to be a lot of houses on the stock, a lot of houses coming on the market. Alan Windley the other day said he estimates 200,000 businesses across the country have gone under. I suspect that's probably more. It's probably going to be more than that. A lot of corporates are making announcements. So there are going to be some losses, but without being callous. One of the things that a stockbroker friend of mine, he said, whether the share price is rising or the share price is dropping, as long as I sell it, I still make a commission. And I think what happens, we're going to get a greater affordability that is going to come in the market, and that greater affordability is going to give us a bigger market to which to sell to. So I believe with dropping interest rates, with an inflation rate, which I think is going to be completely suppressed probably for the next year or so, with a whole lot of houses potentially, especially in the high-end market, probably going to come down in price quite substantially, is that there's going to be enormous opportunities for you as an estate agent that is going to come, and it's literally going to come around the corner. Next slide. I want to tell you a story about Julia. This is not Julia, by the way. The haircut is right. One of the things that happened is that she's my 17-year-old, and when we went into lockdown, she went into lockdown with me, and a couple of things happened. You know, the reality is my life is extremely hectic, and I think most of us have lived these extremely difficult and fast-moving lives. For the first time, we as a family managed to sit together and actually do things together, to make a meal together, to actually just start doing some of those chores which have been piling up for years and years and years. If you're a man in this place, you know that decluttering is a swear word in my family now. We have decluttered every single cupboard and every single drawer. But the reality is that it's drawn us much closer together. For a slightly older child, Julia has been less anxious in going to school. Her skin is cleared up. She's way in advance of where she should be in terms of her years. So every single thing has a plus and a minus. And in our particular instance, it's gone quite well. Next slide. So if I could encourage you, I want to say this, and I want to say this to you, that you've got to just take it one day at a time. Somebody wrote to me today, I can't remember her name now, I haven't written back, but she said, Andre, please can you give us a talk about anger? And I was thinking, why would I do that? And then I suddenly thought to myself, 3 or 4 times in the last 10 days, I've spoken to my wife about my anger. I am so angry at all kinds of things. I'm angry that this is happening. I'm angry that at this stage of my life, I have to reinvent myself. I'm angry because people are doing stupid things. I'm angry because people don't take it seriously. I'm angry at myself because I haven't got more money to help more people. And one of the things that it is just quite normal. One of the things that we've just got to do is we've got to start breathing, just calming down a little bit. And so what happens is that I've stopped trying to beat myself up. I don't want to have a routine that's completely hectic. I don't want to work 12 hours a day, and I have been doing that, and I think that's one of the problems. One of the things that we need to do is we need to learn to be a little bit kinder to ourselves and a little bit kinder to the people that are in the house with us. One day at a time. We've just got to pass it. I keep thinking, and it's a silly comparison because we don't really care, but because at the end of the day, when people went to the war, my grandparents, and I think when you had food rationing and you didn't know if the people were going to come back alive, and times were genuinely difficult, it was a test of your character. If this is a test of my character today, I'm probably failing. What I'd like to say is I want to try and do a little bit better. And then I'm just going to take things just that one day at a time. What do they always say? Everything changes. Everything always will become better. Next slide. It does, however, lend itself to an opportunity for us to have to change, not because we want to change, because we have to change. One of the things that I found fascinating about this whole process, again, as many of you know, I've got a fairly substantial political connections. There was a plan at one stage, and the plan still exists, with which they would evacuate certain townships. In other words, they would go in and evacuate Dunoon or evacuate Khayelitsha. In the event of a massive outbreak, and it was going completely rife, they would make plans. They took the homeless people, and in one day, they found 52 derelict properties, not derelict properties, empty properties belonging to the city, which they can use. The reality is that you as an estate agent, for me as a speaker, we've had to learn different skills. The very fact that you're sitting here on Zoom, and last time we'll do a little poll at the end of the time as well. The majority of us have never done Zoom. I've done Zoom once or twice. What I know about it is dangerous. That's why I've got Terry Winsham sitting here, because she understands it, but I'm learning, and I'm learning every single day. I've learned how to make little video clips. I've learned how to do a whole lot of things, and here's the interesting thing. It's never been cheaper. Go to an organization like Udemy, UDEMY, and see what courses they got. You want to learn how to make a YouTube channel or use Zoom or find out how to use MailChimp or any one of these wonderful tools, and you can get it for anything from 99 Rand to 200 Rand, and you can sit there and in the comfort of your own home be taught one of these skills. And I think for me, this is going to be one of our greatest blessings that we can actually have in this time, is for us to actually improve ourselves. And as Dion said earlier on, some of these tools will never change. Some of these tools are going to stay, and they're going to become the de facto tools of the real estate industry. Next slide, Terry. So what can I encourage you with to make you feel better? If you're feeling really lousy at the moment, and depression and anxiety is a very real thing. Terry and I ran a session on Sunday afternoon for people that were really feeling down, and that is available if you want to just try to contact me privately, and that is still there. It's for free. If you're feeling extremely anxious, or if you're feeling depressed, or you need some help, or you need some assistance, there are people out there that are doing this for free. If you need help, just put your hand up. One of the things my daughter did is she started a blog. And the first thing she said is how to stay positive. And the first thing that she wrote in her Be Positive blog was get into a routine. Get into a routine, whatever that routine is, but make sure you have some routine. To just wake up and have absolutely no goal for the day is bound to make you feel depressed. And so get up, dress up, go as if you're going to work, go and do some work. And even if you only do it for 2 or 3 hours or whatever you need to do, you must pitch up and start getting into some sort of system. The other thing is what happened, and I don't know if your family is anything like mine, but we went and bought, and we didn't stockpile, but we bought enough groceries for the month. And then what we did is we ate all 30 days worth of snacks in 3 days. And that doesn't make sense, because what happens, and I said to my mom today, less snacking, less sugar, less baking. We've got to start getting our dietary habits under control, because that's one of the first things that affects your mood. If you're feeling sluggish and puffy and bloated, it doesn't make you feel good. And obviously now we've got the opportunity to go do some exercise. 3 easy steps: routine, eating, and exercise, that will help with your mental state at the moment. Next slide, please. All right. I'm going to ask the question in a few seconds' time, so prepare yourselves. There's all kinds of interesting things that these Zoom systems can do. This is not you, by the way. If you're looking for yourself, this is a photograph of another group. What we've done is we've been experimenting with things like breakaway groups, polls, whiteboards, and the reality is that we're just giving you the really the communication tool side of this, and maybe one of the other Miltons things, we'll get to the stage where we can show you some of the other abilities. And one of the things we're going to show you today is how to do a poll, which is something you can do with groups of people, or you can even do with yourself, or you can pick up things and see what's happening. How many of you are 100% comfortable with Zoom? Because if this is going to become one of the major de facto systems that you're going to communicate with, then what happens, you need to be very skilled at it. And even if you're a free user, make sure that it's going quite well. Next slide. I've already made the offer, and I'm going to make the offer again. We didn't ask it in the poll this time, but everyone knows my email, andre@bigpositiveguy.com. Go to the internet, type in Big Positive Guy. I'm the only one left. You can find me quite easily. If you are suffering from any of these things, from phobias and stress and panic and depression and stress, anxiety, any of these things, and you need some help now, don't leave it. If you need some assistance, come ask. I'm not the person with all the answers, but I know people who have, and I know people who will look after you, and I will look after you well. And I'm not talking about sort of casual people. These are medical professionals who will do it. There are so many great organizations that are helping with this. I, again, today got a letter from one of the qualified psychologists to say, if you need help, we can help you, and stuff like that. There's free things at the moment. Next one. All right, so here's one of my key things that I wanted to come across to you today. I haven't brought you a lot of good news. And the reality is that, but I hope it's real news. I hope it's actual news and that you can understand it. There is a very real virus out there, and it's going to affect us. One of the questions that everyone asks me is, how long is this going to last? How long is this going to last? And so I'm going to give you a technical answer, and then I'll weigh it up against the realities of life. We have moved from a stage 5 to a stage 4. Professor Karim, the top virologist and epidemiologist in this country, has basically told us is that we should move to level 4 when there are less than 100 people per day getting the disease. The reality is that that has not happened. We are over 400 per day in most cases. And one of the things he suggested is that we stay longer. And the president has actually made the decision that to weigh up business against how many people are going to get sick, he's actually rolled in business earlier than the recommendations were. So I think kudos to him. He's immediately starting there. So the second thing is when you go from a 4 to a 3. And this is quite logical. And if anybody wants the slides, you can actually, in fact, I'll probably just send it to you anyway, because these slides are clearly available. They are the guidelines for the government, and they are not secret. They've been announced on television. The only problem is they're a little bit difficult to understand. So maybe I'll just pick out one or two of the important slides and show you where it actually says this. One of the things that we need to look at is the disease getting better or worse? In other words, the spread of the disease is getting better or worse because we've relaxed the lockdown. And I think this lockdown has been very gentle. I mean, to be very honest, 5 to 4, they've given us very little space. But what happens, you need to measure that. So how do you measure it? Well, the virus has got a system where you only pick it up for 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks' time, we're going to turn around and say, we can start seeing how many extra people are getting it on day 1. So that's not really a good test. So potentially you should leave it for up to a month. And in a month's time, we'll be able to start seeing the effects. In other words, if we're going from 400 to 4,000 to 40,000, then that's going to be an extremely negative thing. And a call has to be made at that stage about whether you then go to the next level of level 3 or whether you stay at level 4, or in worst case scenario, whether you go to level 5 back again. I suggest that there will be some reversals. They're not going to be in the big stages, I don't believe, but they're going to be at individual business level. Blacksmith client down the road from me here in Epping, 99 people in one day get found to be positive. The reality is you've just closed your business for a long time. First of all, those 99 people are going to be in quarantine for 14 days at least. You're going to have to make all the preparation. And if you do not take care of your employees, you're going to make a complete reversal and possibly lose a whole lot of number of weeks. But here's the good news. The good news is that I believe your industry is poised. If any industry is going to do exceptionally well, I believe real estate is one of those that potentially can benefit enormously. I've only been given 50 minutes now, but if we had more time and I could sit and break it down with you, I will show you where I think this is the moment in time that all you guys that did your qualifications and have been in the real estate industry and taken the pain of all these things is potentially one of those times that you're going to boom. If you buy a property or a share or a stock, there's a rule that says buy low, sell high. And I want to ask you today is if we look at the economy and we say, based on a scale of say 0 to 10, where 10 is this is the best economy that the world has ever seen, and 0, we are absolutely in desperate trouble. Where would you rate South Africa at the moment? 0, 1, 2? Is there space for us to get further? I think there's lots of space for us to get further, but maybe we're a 1 or a 2. Surely this is the opportunity that many people have been waiting for to enter into the market. I want to argue as well is that in 1918, the pandemic, one of the things that taught us is that after the pandemic, there were times of great growth. The stock exchange, when it crashed at this moment in time when everything went on the lockdown, had the same levels as the 1929 stock exchange crash. I'm a keen student of history, and one of the things I will say to you is that, yes, for 3 years there was a hell of a down period from 29 to 32. But from 32 to 39 were one of the fastest growing periods in the history of man. The same thing happened after the Second World War. After 1948, we actually coined terms like baby boomers. I suspect we might just be going to this. We've been in a long, protracted lull where nothing has happened. And I suspect we're about to pick these things up. So I want to encourage you to do whatever you need to do. Put your head down, and I don't care how you do it, and you've got to survive. You have to survive the next couple of months. I see today Adrian Gosler from Remax's post. He said that the Minister of Trade and Industry is prepared again to look to see if you guys can go back to work earlier. So let's just hope and pray that that does happen, and that potentially you could be going back to work in as little as 3 weeks and hopefully not longer than a month or two. So be brave, hang in there. For those of you that haven't got any mechanism to sustain yourselves, and there are many of you out there, so be sympathetic to those people who run out of cash for whatever reason. I want to say to you is that look at your opportunities, and if you have to do something else in the meantime, do it. Do it. My daughter's been selling masks and hand sanitizer and stuff through her little Instagram account and making a few $1,000 a month. If she's able to do that, then what happens, I'm sure you can. In fact, one of the things that we have done, we've spoken to the Chamber of Commerce. For many of you who've never been small business people or don't know how these things work, the Chamber of Commerce is offering free for you to help small businesses from scratch. In other words, show you how to do it, show you some opportunities that are available at the moment. And I'm going to make that opportunity open to the people from Miltons and say, if you want to come to these things, there are books involved, there's coaching, there's online coaching from the Chamber of Commerce for all those people that have potentially lost their jobs and need to go out and find another industry. Or like in your instance, just for a few months, you need to make a few extra $1,000 so that you can take yourself through to the end. Next slide. I want to encourage you today to say is that we're living in a difficult time, but it's not an unbeatable time. I think one of the things that happens is that we were sitting in a situation where so many things were going wrong in our world that we almost needed a correction. I don't want to sit like one of these bunny huggers because I'm not one of them. But the reality is the more I look at the world, and I see clean oceans, I see animals walking in the street, I see families playing together. When we started doing the walks outside my house, everyone broke the rule because everyone walks as a family, but I loved it. I loved it. The husbands and wives and children and dogs, everybody was for the first time in a very long time acting like families. So I want to encourage you all and say this is not the end of the world. This is just a little difficult hump that we're going through. For those of you that are older stations, I'm looking at, I can't see many of you, but Hanley, I'm looking at you. Hanley, when I started off in property, and that was early, in 1987, we had our first stock exchange crash. And I'll never forget that at that stage, to buy a house, you needed 50% of the bond in cash. And everyone said the industry would never, ever, ever survive that. And we survived that. In 1999, when the interest rates went up to 23%, everyone said that we would never, ever, ever survive that. In 2009, when what happens, we had the global financial crash. I remember I started my speaking career speaking to a group of estate agents like you, where the banks had not given a single bond for 5 months. You all remember that. 2009, January to May, there wasn't a single bond. We all got through it. When you guys were told you had to do the Enki of 4s and 5s, and everyone said, oh, it's going to chase everybody away. The reality is we've done those things. We've come out the other side. Don't get to 5 yards from where the winning line is, where the opportunities are going to open up, and now let yourself get out of the market. So I want to encourage you. My doors are open if you want to chat. If you want to speak to anyone in Miltons, I'm sure they're all available. They're incredibly intelligent human beings. Make sure you get through to the next process. And yeah, I think good things are on the horizon. I am now going to say thank you. So thank you very much for everyone. I'm glad hope you enjoyed that. I am going to hand over to, thank you, Rosa. Robert, if you're there, if we can just flick over to Robert. There we go, buddy.
Hello, Andre, thanks. And yeah, welcome everybody. Nice to have you all here and a fantastic turnout. Just from our side, I thought what I would like to share with all of you is just a few, perceptions from our side as conveyancers, just to also tell you how we've experienced this whole situation. And I'm pretty sure that most attorneys out there will agree when I tell them, or when I say to you that, being in unprecedented times that we're living in, this thing that we've all read about and heard about called force majeure, or vis major, as we refer to it in Latin. It's a concept which I learned about in Roman law, I think in my first or second year at university, and we might have dealt with it once or twice when we did law of contract. And in my 25 years of practicing as an attorney, I can honestly tell you I've never had to give anybody advice on the topic until 5 weeks ago. And of course, it led there too, that we had to scramble and, go look through our law reports and look through our old books on the law of contract and remind ourselves what exactly does this mean and exactly how does it affect people. And of course, it's also brought some very interesting and challenging questions to us. And I was looking at my phone just now just to remind myself when Dion and I, we being of old litigation stock, and Isaac as well, we get very excited, and it must be quite pathetic when people get excited to ask and answer all these weird and wonderful questions. But last week, Thursday, 20 to 11 in the evening, Dion Vels and I were standing, we were on our phones debating the contents of a newsflash that went out on Friday, just to make sure that we were correct. And in as much as it also brings doom and gloom, it also brings a lot of excitement to our lives, those of us that want to try and wade through this and advise people. But just from our perspective, the typical challenges that we faced and the things we've had to advise on, I'd like to use this opportunity just to quickly, maybe for 5 minutes, just summarize all the typical questions that we've received and the answers that we've given, especially for those of you that may not have seen our news flashes or followed us on Facebook. But the first typical questions we got were those regarding rental agreements. And here we saw basically 3 categories. Now, what happens if you lose your job, but you're still in possession of your property? Do you still have to pay rent? And in a nutshell, the answer is yes. The fact that you've lost your job because of Vis-Maya, because of lockdown, does not necessarily pose a defense. So generally speaking, you would still be held liable to pay a rental, unfortunately. The second question that we got was people that were prohibited from entering their premises. We're talking here about tenants who signed leases before lockdown but were prohibited from moving in, or commercial tenants. And I mean, we ourselves fall into this category. Some of our offices we're renting. Yourselves, those of you that own estate agencies, you haven't been able to trade, but you're still expected to pay rent. And the law there, of course, is if you're not able to access your premises, then you would probably be entitled to reduction in rent, provided that the courts are going to hold one day that lockdown does amount to Vis-Maya or force majeure. And it does seem to me that if we look at all the different articles that have been written, all the attorneys seem to agree that we should be able to categorize what's happening today as Vis-Maya. So if you are in possession of a property, even though you can't, if you haven't been able to access it, then you probably will be able to insist on a rental reduction. I'm not talking about a rental holiday, we're talking about an actual rental reduction. There's a difference. So just bear that in mind going forward if you have to give advice, or if you find yourself in a position where your landlord is knocking on your door expecting you to pay rent, even though you couldn't use the premises. And in this regard, we also have to bear in mind that if you have signed the lease, most of us are going to have stock of some sort in the property. Like us, for example, where we've got office equipment, or if you're running a food business, a restaurant, you've got all kinds of assets in the premises. And of course, you have to then pay some kind of rental. You can't expect the landlord to allow you to store your goods there for free for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks. So those are some of the issues that we had there with rentals. And then, of course, we've also seen a number of challenges, especially with signing OTPs. What do we do if we have a buyer or a seller who wants to sell and buy property, but they don't have printers and scanners? And there, some of you will have noticed, or most of you should have noticed by now, that we've invented this thing called the photo sale agreement, where you can actually take photos of handwritten notes where people accept offers and they refer to emails, etc. So that is a tool which we are starting to see people are using. We've received a number of deals in this fashion already. That, of course, now led to another question, which was, are the banks going to accept this? And the answer there is yes, because today we actually found out that the banks are in fact looking at unsigned OTPs. They're prepared to actually grant bonds on unsigned offers. How they're doing this exactly, I'm not sure, but if they're prepared to look at an unsigned offer, then I'm sure that the photo agreement that we've invented, or that we've proposed, that the banks will accept that too. So that's a bit of good news at least. The other concern, of course, that has arisen is whether, what's going to happen if the banks start to cancel their bonds, which of course is a risk because they're going to start reassessing people. It seems that between Dion and I, or Dion actually referred me to a court case, which we've been battling to actually find. He says he read it some time ago, and we're trying to find the court case where it seems that if once a bond is granted, if it is pulled by the bank, even if it's through no fault of your own or as the purchaser, then unfortunately you can still be held to the contract because the condition was met. But we're trying to find the court case just to have a look at it and see how it can actually apply under current circumstances. So that's another challenge that we're looking at. Then, of course, we've got the other question of major pressing concern is for agents who aren't able to return to work, which has also brought the question, or the questions, what about viewings? What about people that want to move? Well, the reality is we're not allowed to arrange viewings. We're not allowed to move premises. That is the bottom line. That's what the current regulations tell us. The only glimmer of hope that I can give estate agents here, something I was reminded of this morning actually, is that in terms of the current regulations, and here we're talking about Table 1, Part H, Item 9, there's a little exclusion which says that if you are not yourself involved in an essential service, but if you are a professional who has to provide support to somebody that is involved in essential services, then you can trade. And what this basically means is, if, for example, a nurse, and I'm using an example now from another attorney, if a nurse, for example, has to relocate because she's accepted work elsewhere, or she's needed at a different hospital, or a doctor, for example, or even a conveyancer, because we as conveyancers are deemed to be part of the essential services industry since we have to support the deeds office. If you have to help such a person find accommodation, then you are allowed to work. So it's in very, very, very limited instances that estate agents can actually trade at the moment, but then only as a support to other essential services. So I know it's not much hope, but at least it is a bit of silver lining at the end of around a cloud that we have to also bear in mind. And then, of course, maybe the other biggest challenge we face up to date now is the fact that last week we were promised that the deeds office is going to be opening as of yesterday, the 4th of May, which never happened. Over the weekend, I was made aware of a memorandum that was being circulated by the Cape Town Attorneys Association telling us that the latest news is that the deeds office was not going to be opening up to the public as from yesterday, because they are still scrambling to try and decide how they're going to do this. And I'm not sure whether it's related to the fact that they don't have masks or sanitizers, or whether they're still trying to work on a roster because only 1/3 of the workforce is allowed to return. But the bottom line is, at this point, we don't yet know when the deeds office is actually going to open up. And of course, when they do, I'm sure they're going to be faced with a massive backlog regarding all the deeds that were lodged before lockdown that weren't registered. So guys, we've had a lot of challenges. We've had some very interesting questions and scenarios. We've tried our best to give you guys some guidance. And yeah, all we can do is hope and pray that you can all return to work as soon as possible. I know there's been a lot of pressure on government from various organizations in your industry which are rooting to try and get you guys back up and running. And we can only hope and pray that that will materialize in the very near future, so that we can all get back to business as normal. And in the meantime, Andre has actually pointed out a number of positives which we need to take home with us today. It's not all doom and gloom. And as he also said, maybe in closing, this is a temporary setback. And like everything else, this too shall pass, as they say. So until then, guys, yeah, we are here for you. If you have any questions or concerns, if there's anything that we can do for you, any assistance or advice, please contact us. You have all of our contact details. And we hope to see you in real life soon again. Thanks, Andre.